is going to hell down here in Texas.
Oh yeah, what's up everybody? Welcome to the Lone Gunman Podcast. This is episode 227. And I am your host, Big Bad Bob, otherwise known as Rob Clark. Here with you again today for another fine, entertaining, and informative show, an episode of the Lone Gunman Podcast. Happy Easter, first of all. Yeah, this is what I'm doing on Easter. He is risen and so have I. So let's get right to it. Now, on the last episode, we talked about a certain Johnson 30-06 rifle that mysteriously vanished from everywhere, but was seemingly found in or around Dealey Plaza on November the 22nd, 1963, which led to the FBI investigating fingerprints found on the rifle belonging to Lauren Hall and Leroy Payne of the Hathcock Detective Agency. So if you missed that episode, I would encourage everyone to go back and check it out. It's just the last one, 226, I believe. Oh, that rifle. Yeah, that's the episode. Also, off the top, I would encourage everyone to follow along on Twitter, The Lone Gunman 7, on YouTube, just search for The Lone Gunman Podcast page. Facebook, same thing, Lone Gunman Facebook page. And also now, inspired by various things, and I've been putting it off for a while, but now on TikTok, folks, the Lone Gunman Podcast is on TikTok. Just search for @ the Lone Gunman 7, I believe. Hold on, let me double check that. I think I made it the same as the Twitter, but I just want to double check before I tell you something erroneous. Yeah, it's the Lone Gunman 7. You could also probably find it just by searching the email address for this show, which is the Lone Gunman Podcast @gmail.com. So check it out. I got 2 TikToks up already. I'll be doing a new TikTok for this show, and random factoids and all kinds of craziness. So make sure you're checking it out. I just figured it might be a good way to grow the show and reach some of the youngsters who are into the TikToking. Now I sound like one of these old fogey farts, but no, I enjoy fun things like that, and look forward to adding that aspect to the podcast and having a gay old time. So check it out on TikTok @ the Lone Gunman 7, just like the Twitter. Though, and the TikTok will actually have exclusive content that I don't post anywhere else. So make sure you check it, follow, and all that happy jazz. Share them, whatever. So today, we're going to be taking a look at a couple generals and colonels who might have some kind of bearing on the events that happened on November 22nd, 1963. And I promise you this is going somewhere. So don't just die off on me 15 minutes in. I'm telling you it's going somewhere. You're going to want to pay attention till the end. So the first person we're going to talk about here today, the first general, is Charles Willoughby. Willoughby. Now, some of you have heard his name attached to some of these extreme right-wing factions in the United States, but just to set the stage, I'm going to explain to you a little bit about who these people were and kind of explain how they're, quote, involved or possibly involved in the Kennedy assassination. So we're going to start with Charles Willoughby, okay? His real name is actually Adolf Shep Wiedenbach, okay? The son of Baron von Shep Wiedenbach from Baden, Germany, and Emma Willoughby. And he was born in 1892. After attending the University of Heidelberg, Willoughby moved to the United States in 1910 and became known as Charles Willoughby. Willoughby joined the Army and served with Company K, 5th U.S. Infantry, and eventually reached the rank of sergeant. He was commissioned a major in 1914 in the Officers Volunteer Corps. During the First World War, Willoughby served on the Western Front. In October of 1919, Captain Willoughby was reassigned to the 24th Infantry, serving in Columbus, New Mexico. His next assignment took him overseas to San Juan, Puerto Rico, where again he served as both company and battalion commander in the 65th Infantry from February 21 to May of 23. He now joined the Military Intelligence Division and served as military attaché in Venezuela, Colombia, and Ecuador. In August of 29, Willoughby started a course at the Command and General Staff School at Fort Leavenworth, Texas. After graduating 2 years later, he stayed on at the school as an instructor, teaching the subjects of intelligence and military history. He also edited the Command and General Staff School Quarterly. In 1936, he was appointed as an instructor in the infantry school at Fort Benning. Later, he was promoted to the rank of lieutenant colonel. He developed extreme right-wing views and once delivered a speech to Spanish dictator Generalissimo Francisco Franco. At a lunch in Madrid, he also praised Benito Mussolini. Historical judgment, freed from the emotional haze of the moment, will credit Mussolini with wiping out a memory of defeat by reestablishing the traditional military supremacy of the white race. Willoughby became logistics officer in the headquarters of the Philippine Department in Manila, where he served under General Douglas MacArthur. Maybe you've heard of that guy. Promoted to the rank of Major General. Here we go. Okay, he was a Major General. Willoughby served as General MacArthur's Chief of Intelligence in the General Headquarters Southwest Pacific area from 1941 to 1951. The Japanese Air Force attacked the U.S. Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor on December the 7th, 1941. The following day, they carried out airstrikes in the Philippines and destroyed half of MacArthur's Air Force. MacArthur was much criticized for this, as he had been told to move his Air Force after the raid on Hawaii the previous day. The Japanese Army also invaded the Philippines, and they soon held 3 bases in northern Luzon. And on 22nd of December, the 14th Army landed at Lingayen Gulf and quickly gained control of Manila from the inexperienced Filipino troops. Although only 57,000 Japanese officers were landed on Luzon, it had little difficulty capturing the island. General Douglas MacArthur now ordered a general retreat to the Bataan Peninsula. A series of assaults forced the U.S. defensive lines back, and on 22nd February 1942, MacArthur was ordered to leave Bataan and go to Australia. General Jonathan Wainwright remained behind with 11,000 soldiers and managed to hold out until the beginning of May. In December of 1942, Willoughby was with General Robert Eichelberger in the capture of Buna village in the Bunagona campaign. He was awarded the Army's second highest decoration for gallantry, the Distinguished Service Cross for extraordinary heroism in action. Willoughby accompanied Douglas MacArthur to Tokyo for the occupation of Japan. When attempts to suppress news to the United States ended in failure, he labeled reporters who defied him as communists. A Cold War warrior, he was a strong supporter of the activities of Joseph McCarthy. He also lobbied the Congress to authorize $100 million for General Franco's government in Spain. MacArthur once described the 6'3" Willoughby as, quote, my little fascist. How cute. In 1951, Willoughby went before the House on Un-American Activities and provided info about the Richard Swords spy network. This included info that claimed that Agnes Smedley was a communist subversive. In retirement, Willoughby was a member of the International Committee for the Defense of Christian Culture. During the 1950s, he worked closely with Billy James Hargis, H.L. Hunt, John Rousselot, and other extreme right-wing figures. Willoughby was also a board member of Young Americans for Freedom, an organization created by Larry Schmidt. 2 days after the assassination of John F. Kennedy, a long-distance telephone operator in Mexico City monitored an international phone call. She heard one of the voices saying, quote, the Castro plan is being carried out. Bobby is next, unquote. The telephone numbers were traced. One number belonged to Emilio Núñez Portuando, the Latin American affairs editor of Willoughby's Foreign Intelligence Digest. In 1968, Willoughby moved with his wife to beautiful Naples, Florida, and Charles Willoughby died on October the 25th, 1972. And from the book, The Man Who Knew Too Much by Dick Russell, a White House memorandum prepared for JFK in mid-August 63 estimated the radical right spent as much as $25 million annually, supported by 70 foundations, 103 corporations, and 25 utility companies, and 250 rich, identifiable individuals. In the thick of it all and much more was General Charles Willoughby. While his mentor, General MacArthur, passed into quiet retirement and was occasionally sought by Kennedy for advice, Willoughby approached his 70th birthday with samurai swords placed strategically next to his desk. Willoughby's holy war against the Red Menace found him sitting on the boards of most of the major conservative groups and reaching into Europe and Latin America to start his own international committee for the defense of Christian culture. Willoughby's publisher and friend, Billy James Hargis, was a short, portly, double-chinned fellow in his mid-30s who gained much of his financial support from H.L. Hunt and other wealthy oilmen. Along with Willoughby, who was his Washington eyes and ears, another of Hargis's advisory committee members was retired Lieutenant General Pedro de Valle, U.S. Marine commander in the Pacific Theater during World War II. After the Korean War, de Valle had become president of ITT's Latin American operations. In September of 61, Billy James Hargis announced that a secret fraternity to coordinate right-wing activities would soon be formed. And on March 21, 62, a carefully selected group was called together in Washington. No press were allowed at the founding session of the Anti-Communist Liaison, which brought together 100 delegates representing some 75 right-wing groups at the Washington Hotel. Named as its chairman and operating head was Edward Hunter, a National Advisory Board member of the Young Americans for Freedom. The new group's insider was U.S. Representative John Rousselot, a John Birch Society spokesman and Christian Crusade board member from Los Angeles. It also had a Southern California outsider, a Colonel William Potter Gale, another ex-MacArthur man. In 1962, a California state chairman of the Constitution Party, Colonel Gale, announced his candidacy for the governorship on a platform calling for the abolition of all income taxes. Hey, I'm for that. He also organized soon after the pivotal springtime meeting in Washington a paramilitary outfit. So there's a little bit. Well, this part is kind of fascinating to me as well. I don't know if you guys ever watched History Channel show. I think it was called Yamashita's Gold, where these guys were looking for all this gold that had been plundered and looted from all over the Pacific by General Yamashita during World War II and hidden all over the place. Supposed to be a treasure of untold millions, maybe billions of gold and other valuables. But just to kind of tip a hat towards that, from the book Gold Warriors by the Seagraves, Sterling and Peggy. In Europe, the OSS at times worked closely with other intelligence services, but competition and rivalry were intense. One of the fiercest turf battles over the tracking of Nazi loot went on inside the U.S. government, waged between the Secretary of the Treasury, Henry Morgenthau, and Allen Dulles, the OSS chief in Switzerland. A romantic who had a much more cavalier attitude about such things. Access loot was being moved under the noses of allies into neutral safe havens. In one instance, American agents in Switzerland watched 280 trucks of Nazi gold move from Germany across France and Spain to the safe haven of neutral Portugal. Owned by the native or private Swiss firms, the trucks were painted with the Swiss cross, allowing the gold to be moved under neutral cover. However, while the gathering of intelligence on war loot may have been disjointed, ultimately all such reports were passed up to the office of the Secretary of War, Henry Stimson. He had a special interest in the subject of looted bullion and kept a group of financial experts thinking hard about it. 3 of these men were Stimson's special assistants, John J. McCloy, maybe you heard of him, Robert Lovett, and consultant Robert Anderson. Unlike Europe, where the OSS was tolerated by General Dwight Eisenhower, in the Southern Pacific, General MacArthur resisted all attempts by the OSS to get a foothold in his territory. MacArthur and staff intended to conduct their own brand of special ops from their headquarters in Australia without any interference. In Australia, Willoughby set up the Allied Intelligence Bureau to run guerrilla operations in the Philippines. He also started the Allied Translator and Interpreter Section, otherwise known as ATIS, to monitor Japanese radio broadcasts, interrogate prisoners, and translate captured Japanese documents. Most men in ATIS were Nisi, second generation Japanese born in foreign countries, in this case born in America of Japanese parents. However, Willoughby's approach to guerrilla warfare proved to be too cautious for MacArthur, who craved audacity. Leaving Willoughby in charge of intelligence gathering, MacArthur gave special operations to his intimate friend and personal attorney, Courtney Whitney. Willoughby was furious, but MacArthur soothed him by promoting him to general. In this way, MacArthur's intimate crony, Courtney Whitney, became the key man running secret agents in the islands and reporting of the war loot, including those from John Ballinger. The OSS had no part whatsoever in this. Whitney was effective in special ops because he was well connected in Manila, a clever rich man on a first-name basis with all the politically powerful families in the Philippines. In the late 20s, when he had been fresh out of law school in D.C., MacArthur got Whitney a job with the top Manila law firm of DeWitt, Perkins, and Onryo, who handled MacArthur's financial affairs in the islands, and by Pearl Harbor, Whitney was intimately involved in all manner of political legal and financial intrigues has played in the islands. He could call in favors from men like Santa Romani. Now, there's a little picture of Charles Willoughby, an extreme right wing major general in the U.S. Army, served under General MacArthur. And now we move on to one of his proteges, one of Willoughby's proteges. Now, before we do, just keep in mind that folks like Willoughby and folks like General Walker were cavorting with people like Billy James Hargis and H.L. Hunt frequently. This is big money behind a big agenda, and that is anti-communism, extreme right-wing ideology. Okay? So now let's move on to one of Willoughby's proteges, a man by the name of Colonel Bishop. Colonel William Bishop. Like I said, just stick with me. I promise this is going somewhere. Okay? Interesting history, but I'm laying the foundation so you have the entire picture in your brain of who these people were in history. Okay? Now, Colonel William C. Bishop was born in 1923, and during the Second World War, he joined the United States Army. He served under General Douglas MacArthur as military intelligence aide on the General Staff of Intelligence. His immediate supervisor was General Charles Willoughby. Okay, this guy is directly protege of Charles Willoughby. Bishop also worked with Willoughby during the Korean War. Bishop also worked with the Central Intelligence Agency and became involved in its black operations. This involved a policy that was later to become known as executive action, a plan to remove unfriendly foreign leaders from power. Maybe you've heard of it. In 1961, he was responsible for the assassination of Rafael Trujillo, the leader of the Dominican Republic. Bishop was also involved in Operation 40, a CIA hit squad set up before the Bay of Pigs invasion. Frank Sturgis, another member of Operation 40, later explained, quote, this assassination group would, upon orders, naturally assassinate either members of the military or the political parties of the foreign country that you were going to infiltrate, and if necessary, some of your own members who were suspected of being foreign agents. We were concentrating strictly in Cuba at that particular time. Actually, they were operating out of Mexico too. During this period, Bishop worked under Desmond Fitzgerald of the CIA and was involved with anti-Castro groups in Miami such as Alpha 66. He was the case officer for Antonio Veciana and claims that Santo Traficante helped to fund his organization. Bishop also had a close relationship with David Atlee Phillips and Roland Masfer. Okay? These are all names and organizations you've heard of before. I told you we were getting closer. In December of 1962, Doug Felipe Vidal Santiago had a meeting with a lawyer connected to a Citizens Committee to Free Cuba. He told Vidal about a conversation he had had with Henry Cabot Lodge, who had been told by Walt Rostow that John F. Kennedy was exploring, quote, a plan to open a dialogue with Cuba. Vidal was furious about what he considered to be an act of betrayal and immediately told leaders of the anti-Castro community and his CIA contact, Colonel William Bishop. According to Dick Russell, Vidal was also an information conduit for General Edwin Walker. Dick Russell later interviewed William Bishop, who confirmed that he was aware of the plot to kill JFK. He claimed the plot included such people as Tony Verona and Roland Masfer. By 1963, the Cuban element, see, Kennedy had gone to Miami to the Orange Bowl down there and made this statement that the brigade's flag would fly over Cuba and all this crap. That was a stopgap. The exiles for a time believed him. And shortly after that, a presidential executive order came out that no military style incursions into Cuba based from the United States would be tolerated. The end result was a complete distrust and dislike for Kennedy and his administration by the Cuban exiles. You take Tony Verona and Rolando Masfer to name but two, and there were many, many more, when serious talks began to happen about the possibility of assassinating Kennedy. In another interview he gave to Dick Russell in 1990, Colonel Bishop claimed that Jimmy Hoffa gave Roland Masfer $50,000 to arrange the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Bishop disapproved of this act. I firmly believe in our system of government, if you don't like the man, then vote him out of office. Don't shoot him out. And what we had was a coup d'etat on November 22nd, 1963. And that's according to Colonel William Bishop. Furthermore, interviewed by Dick Russell in 1990, Bishop says, I did look into Oswald's background. I'd never met him, but I'd seen him in a training film in New Orleans the past summer. He just happened to be in the group out there at the Pontchartrain camp, trying to get in with the anti-Castro exiles. I thought even then that Oswald was a decoy. There's no way in hell he could have fired 3 shots in that space of time with that accuracy with that weapon. Of course, when Oswald was killed, the Warren Commission's investigation was a joke. The whole bit, military intelligence, CIA, FBI, where the mistake was made, the intelligence reports coming in from various men in the field were not assimilated and categorized and broken down to get some logical conclusion. The Warren Commission went into this thing with a preconceived idea. Overly simplified, in Oswald's case, they tried to make a round peg and drive that son of a bitch into a square hole, and they did it. Interviewed again by Dick Russell, this time from 1992. What were you doing in New Orleans that summer? I asked. Bishop paused and took a deep breath. Pushing his glasses back above his nose, he turned to give a hard look at Gary Shaw. How far can I really trust him? Bishop asked, casting a finger in my direction. Shaw said, tell him anything you tell me. Bishop nodded and continued. I was to obtain additional funding. Say this no more, from the crime syndicate out of New Orleans for Alpha 66. At that point in time, Rolando Masfer was the key bagman, for lack of a better term, for Alpha 66. Primarily, the funding came through the syndicate. Because of Masfer's connection with those people back in Cuba, he had ties to Santo Traficante Jr. and other criminal elements. Organized crime, pure and simple. He also had different ties with Jimmy Hoffa as far back as 62, I think. But Rolando, from time to time, when it came to large sums of money, had sticky fingers. I think that's why he was killed eventually. Either that or because of the Kennedy assassination, because he knew about it. The colonel stopped talking again and sat in silence for a time, then resumed in low tones. By 1963, the Cuban elements, see, Kennedy had gone to Miami, and we already used this quote. Yeah, talking about flying and pissing off the Cuban exiles. But to move on, according to Fabian Escalante, okay, this comes from the Cuban officials and JFK Historians Conference in December of 1995. He, Felipe Vidal Santiago, was arrested in March of 1964 when he tried to ram his boat in Cuba with 3 others to perform acts of sabotage. There he had many conversations with us. He just told us this of his own accord. We didn't really ask questions. Our interests really were in the plan of sabotage. Sabotage when and where. We wanted to know what was behind the sabotage, and then he started to talk about his subject. So then that's why a decision was made to take down everything he said, and that's why we have tapes. He talked about things not associated with the sabotage. There were too many people. We didn't have the resources or tapes to take it. It was in his first declaration, bunch of political information. He came to us for the first time to talk to us about September of 62, opening a communication with Cuba. And that was very important to tape all of his conversations about Cuba. He was informing the groups of exiles in the United States about Kennedy administration's attempts to have a dialogue with Cuba. And while interrogating Santiago in Cuba, we came up with some more interesting information. He was arrested in March of 1964, a few months after the assassination. He explained that he had a relationship with a CIA official who was military intelligence, a William Bishop. He says that in November of 63, Colonel William Bishop invited him to a meeting in Dallas. It was a meeting with a few wealthy people in Dallas talking about financing an anti-Castro uh, invasion into Cuba. The first few days of November 63, he said that Colonel William Bishop picked them up in his car in Miami and they drove to Dallas and that they were there for about 4 days. This would have had to happen the weekend before the assassination, according to what he says. They stayed in a second class hotel. Bishop left several times to have interviews, but this guy did not know who he was talking to. After approximately 4 days, they returned to Miami. After the assassination, they were in Tallahassee when he went to visit a new house for a new car. I'm guessing that means he bought a new house and a new car. Hey. This is from High Times Magazine, August 1996, an article by Dick Russell. Ex-militant Felipe Vidal Santiago, arrested on a 64 sabotage mission into Cuba, told his captors that in Washington, D.C. in December of 62, he'd met with lobbyists connected to a Citizens Committee to Free Cuba. This lawyer informed Vidal Santiago of a conversation he'd had with Republican Henry Cabot Lodge, soon to be U.S. ambassador to South Vietnam, who said he'd heard from Kennedy aide Walt Rostow of a plan to open dialogue with Cuba. Vidal told us he was very surprised. In fact, Vidal, infuriated and betrayed, had alerted his exile cohorts as well as his CIA contact, Colonel William Bishop. It was almost like a bomb, an intentional message against Kennedy. Vidal was also an information conduit for General Edwin Walker, the ultra-right Texan paramilitary leader at whom Oswald had allegedly taken a shot in April of 63. And FBI files call Vidal a very close friend of Miami mobster and CIA-affiliated John Martino, who intimated to family and associates that he had foreknowledge of the JFK assassination. Felipe Vidal Santiago told Cuban intelligence that on the weekend before the assassination, he was invited to a meeting in Dallas by CIA's Colonel William Bishop. It was supposed to be a meeting with a few wealthy people to talk about financing anti-Castro operations, says Escalante, but Bishop left on his own for, quote, interviews or meetings numerous times during their stay in Dallas. After approximately 4 days, they returned to Miami. Not long before his death in 1993, Colonel Bishop confirmed to this writer that he'd had knowledge of the JFK plot. The Cubans indicate that the Vidal Bishop Dallas trip concerned plans for retaking the island once Castro's people had been implicated in the assassination. Escalante surmises that Oswald was an intelligence agent of the U.S., CIA, FBI, military, or all these together. We don't know. He was manipulated, told he was penetrating a group of Cuban agents that wanted to kill Kennedy, but from the very beginning, he was to be the element to blame Cuba. Not less than 15 persons took part in the assassination, Escalante theorizes. At the same time, knowing a little about CIA operations, we see how they use the principle of decentralized operations, independent parties with a specific role, to guarantee compartmentalization and to keep it simple. It's a good theory, folks. Let me read that one more time. We see how they use the principle of decentralized operations, independent parties with specific roles, to guarantee compartmentalization and to keep it simple. Now, we just talked about one of Colonel Bishop's friends, right? John Martino. So let's check out a little bit about Mr. John Martino. And stick with me. Like I said, folks, this is going somewhere. Stay tuned. Okay? I promise I'm going somewhere with all this. I promise. Stay with me. It's important I lay out this roadmap of folks and associates. Okay? Very important. So, John Martino. This is from Noel Twyman's book, Bloody Treason. John Martino is one more CIA mafia operative who had foreknowledge of the JFK assassination. An important aspect of Martino's story is that it was confirmed by his wife and in part by his son, and also told to a Newsday reporter, and Martino had instructed that it not be revealed until after his death. In 1994, Anthony Summers and his wife Robin interviewed Martino's widow Florence, age 80, and her son Edward. Mrs. Martino said she was with her husband at their home in Miami on November 22nd, 1963, and she has a vivid memory of that moment. We were supposed to go out to the Americana for lunch, but it was on the radio about the visit to Dallas, about President Kennedy, and he said, Flo, they're going to kill him. They're going to kill him when he gets to Dallas. Summers wrote that Mrs. Martino said she had questioned her husband briefly and got no response, went out for a little while, and was home again by the time her son Edward heard the news of the assassination on television. When I called them in, Edward remembered my father went white as a sheet, but it wasn't like gee whiz, it was more like a confirmation. Then John was instantly on the phone, frantically making phone calls, Florence remembered. He got, I don't know how many calls from Texas. I don't know who called him, but he was on the phone, on the phone, on the phone all day. Newsday reporter John Cummings, who knew Martino from previous years, told Summers that in 1975, Martino told him he'd been part of the assassination of Kennedy. He wasn't in Dallas pulling the trigger, but he was involved. He implied that his role was delivering money or fabricating things. He asked me not to write it while he was still alive. Martino told Cummings that the anti-Castro Cubans were involved and that there had been 2 guns and 2 people involved. The last time he met reporter Cummings, Martino made an astonishing claim. It came out of the blue, Cummings recalls. John told me he had himself met Oswald several weeks before the assassination in Miami. He said an FBI agent named Connors asked him to come to a boat docked in Biscayne Bay and introduce him to Oswald by name. The impression John got was that Oswald didn't know his ass from his elbow, didn't know what he was involved in. He thought the agent wanted him to meet Oswald because John was involved in anti-communist activity and Oswald was someone this agent was running. We have not been able to trace a Miami agent with the name of Connors answering the description provided by Cummings. FBI files show Martino did not have contacts after the assassination with an agent named James J. O'Connor, whom we tracked down in retirement. John Martino, he said, I'm afraid all I could tell you is yes, the name rings a bell. I don't recall that he was a regular contact, though. O'Connor said he could not recall whether he was in touch with Martino before the assassination. He said he had never met Oswald at any time. Cummings, an investigative reporter for more than 30 years, does not think the Martino allegation was just a crook's slur against a law enforcement officer. I believe Martino, he says. It came across just before he died like a confession. I was told that Connors, the agent he named, was in counterintelligence. Florence Martino died 1 month after Summers' interview in 1994. John Martino's story takes on even more significance in the fact that he was associated with Santos Trafficante. They had been arrested and incarcerated together in Cuba. Moreover, Martino was closely associated with William Pauly, co-founder of the Flying Tigers, ex-ambassador to Peru and Brazil, and right-wing multimillionaire Uh, Paulie was a CIA agent contact close to Allen Dulles. In 1963, Martino was deeply involved with William Paulie in a controversial plot to discredit JFK by proving that Soviet missiles were still in Cuba. The plot included the use of Paulie's boat, the Flying Tiger, to tow a small boat that would be used in a covert op to land a group of Cuban exiles in Cuba. It was thought that they would be able to bring back witnesses to verify that offensive missiles were still in Cuba, thus embarrassing the Kennedy administration. The plot was financed in part by Henry and Claire Booth Luce of Life and Time magazine. The operation was a failure. None of the Cubans who went ashore in the mission were ever heard from again. Paulie's involvement in anti-Castro activities began to surface in the late 70s. In 1977, Gate and Fonzie added Paulie's name to the list of people to be questioned by the HSCA. Around that time, Paulie contracted a nervous ailment, shingles, and 1 week after his name was added to the list, he committed suicide with a gunshot wound to the chest. Sound familiar? This was one more key person dying suddenly when investigators were zeroing in on them. The list includes David Ferry, Johnny Rosselli, Sam Giancana, David Sanchez Morales, and George de Mohrenschildt. Paulie has emerged as potentially a very important person in the Kennedy assassination, though his Far Eastern experiences with the Flying Tigers and military operations. Is it reasonable to assume that Paulie had linkages to General Willoughby? He had financial motives to see John Kennedy eliminated, having lost considerable properties in Cuba when Castro took over. Rumors are that we have a partnership of the CIA with the mafia to assassinate foreign leaders. The CIA's involvement in Allen Dulles' grotesque ultra-secret mind control programs to develop robot assassins, and the CIA and organized crimes partnership in illegal arms shipment and drug running, and we have a picture that is so outlandish and complex as to defy the imagination. And we are not even getting started with a long list of other dangerous secrets that can be enumerated. These people did not play the prescribed rules. They made up their own rules as they went along. They all live lives of deceit and betrayal. And out of this mise en scène exotique emerged the decision to assassinate John F. Kennedy. The HSCA became very interested in Martino in 1977 when an anonymous informant called Fred from Fort Worth telephoned the committee several times and indicated a close relationship with Martino, who had recently died. A synopsis of the HSCA's investigation of Martino in 1977 was provided in a memo by investigators Fonzie and Gonzalez. Fred said that Martino told him that he worked for the CIA and that he was killed by anti-Castro Cubans. Martino said the assassins knew the motorcade route before they went to Dallas. Fred said that Martino's widow would have knowledge of such information. Fred also suggested that a former employer of Martino, Alan Roth, would provide information. On being interviewed, Mrs. Martino denied her husband ever had been associated with the CIA, but produced names of her husband's associates who were involved in CIA ops. He said her husband was arrested by Castro in Cuba because he was mistaken for a Navy commander with the same name. He produced material which indicated her husband had given lectures claiming that Castro was involved in the Kennedy assassination. Former employers Alan Roth and son Kenneth Roth, when interviewed, said that Martino told them he had been involved in CIA operations. They said they believed Martino was related to mafia boss Angelo Bruno of Philadelphia. They provided information of possible Martino involvement in gun dealing. They could provide no information of Martino's involvement in or knowledge of the Kennedy assassination. They provided information which indicates the possible identity of Fred. So you see the ties start to trickle. And we'll scoot through here to next juicy part. So let me see. What was that? Ross says Martino was sent to Guatemala to look after their accounts receivable from their real estate interests there. Martino became very friendly with Jorge Maldonado of Castro Cuban operations, at least insofar as his statements about Vidal. But in the same taped conversations on February 8, 1983, between Bishop and Shaw, Bishop said that he was present at General Edwin Walker's house when Walker, Vidal, Roy Hargraves, and two others discussed the assassination of JFK. This occurred about 1 week after the Walker sniper incident in April of 63. To my surprise, Gary Shaw's memory about Colonel Bishop's failure to mention General Willoughby had not been correct. Bishop had indeed mentioned Willoughby just days before Bishop died. On June 23, 1992, Bishop told Shaw that he had gone to see Walker a few times, and during their meetings, General Charles Willoughby was present. When Bishop revealed that information to Gary Shaw, he had just had 2 heart attacks and died within a few days, and his funeral services were held on July 5, 1992. Of great interest was that Bishop told Shaw that Vidal had been driven in a 1957 black and white Chevy from Miami to Dallas in 1963, the same make, model, and year as the automobile shown in the photograph taken outside of General Walker's home at about the same time he was allegedly shot at by Lee Harvey Oswald. Another item of significance was a paragraph in an FBI document in Shaw's files which reads, "The redacted further advised that on the morning of August 19, 1963, he observed another vehicle with 3 Cubans departing the vicinity of Big Pine Key. He described the vehicle as a 1957 Chevy bearing 1963 Florida license plate. The car appeared to be driven by a medium-sized Cuban with a prominent black mustache. Vidal was described by Colonel Bishop as a ruddy white Cuban athletic smoker, black hair, excellent rifle and pistol skills, mustache on occasion." When the Dallas police were questioned by the Warren Commission about the photograph of the 57 Chevy, they said that the hole was in it when they found it in Oswald's possessions. Later, however, when retired Police Chief Jesse Curry wrote his book, JFK Assassination File, he included a photograph showing Walker's house and the 57 Chevy with the automobile's license plate still intact. Marina Oswald had earlier testified to the Warren Commission that she saw the photograph. There was no hole obscuring the license plate. So, somebody who knew somebody at the Dallas Police Department had this photograph that was allegedly in Oswald's possession of that car, that Chevy in Walker's driveway, had the license plate cut out of it. Why? Colonel Bishop told Shaw that Rolando Masfer was given $500,000 by Jimmy Hoffa exactly 17 days before JFK was killed. Bishop said the information came to him from Cuban General Francisco Cabanilla, Cuba's former commander in the Cuban Air Force, and Cuba's General Patton. According to Bishop, he said the transaction took place at a Miami hotel man to man, and the money was in a briefcase. He also said that Vidal was very close to Rolando Masfer. Bishop said that Masfer had become deeply involved with the mafia and had told him in October of 63 that he would kill Kennedy if he got the chance. He said that Masfer was in Trenton, New Jersey at the time of the assassination. Bishop said this information came from Antonio Veciana of Alpha 66. Bishop also said that Vidal was a member of Alpha 66. Another item of interest that ties in with the gun running in Dallas is that Bishop told Shaw that he had just read the story of Nancy Perrin Rich in Fensterwald's book, and that he, Bishop, had attended the meeting in which Nancy Perrin Rich claimed she had met with a colonel, Jack Ruby, and others, discussing gun running activities. Bishop said he was at the meeting but did not know Jack Ruby, had never connected him to the incident. Bishop also said that he didn't remember that the son of Genovese was present, but most important, Bishop said that Philippe Vidal Santiago was present at the meeting. The Nancy Perrin Rich story and the gun running in Dallas were discussed in the previous chapter. So yeah, read more if you want to. Bloody treason, folks. It's good stuff. Skipping around for some of the more juicy parts here. Apparently, the Colonel Bishop told Gary Shaw, researcher Gary Shaw, all kinds of shit. In Shaw's notes were 2 envelopes filled with copies of Colonel Bishop's card files from the early 60s. I went through the cards, and there were addresses and phone numbers of an amazing array of characters and political figures. They included Eladio Duvalier, Rolando Masfer, Roy Hargraves, names of members of Rolando Masfer's Tiger Group, Mario Garcia Coley Sr.'s address, apartment number, phone numbers, places where he could be reached, and the home address and home phone number of CIA Director John McCone. Also included was the address of Kent Crane, my presidential assistant at the White House, the home phone number of Admiral Tazewell Shepard, and the home address and phone number of Julian Sourwine. Let's see. So Dick Russell, back to his book, The Man Who Knew Too Much. Colonel Bishop claimed to have met Nagel when he was an associate of Rolando Masfer. Russell recalled in his book that Nagel had told him that one of his original assigned targets was to kill Rolando Masfer. Nagel had made another reference to Masfer in a letter to Russell not long after Masfer was blown to bits by a dynamite bomb planted in his car. Nagel had noted, "Pleased to read that the Tiger finally got his." Colonel Bishop told Russell that he finally realized that Nagel was with intelligence under CIA contract, and it was safe to assume that Nagel was involved in Alpha 66 as well. Bishop said it was when he was in New Orleans that Nagel's presence came up. Nagel had been there several times and was trying to get into the inner workings of the anti-Castro movement. He said Nagel was asking too many questions about things he had no business knowing. Bishop said at his end he was trying to determine who the hell Nagel was. He said he called William Colby at the CIA, with whom he had participated in paratrooper training at Fort Benning in 1940. He asked Colby, "Who the hell is this guy?" Colby replied, "I don't know the man. Use discretion." Bishop said it was several months after that when he heard about the Nagel shooting at the bank. Bishop said he did know that there was a Cuban after Nagel, and that Antonio Veciana had told him that. He said there were rumors that Nagel had stumbled onto the fact that there was an assassination being seriously planned. So, in Bishop's opinion, the reason for the bank shoot up in El Paso was for Nagel to get himself picked up and protected. This was also confirmed to me previously by Nagel's estate executor, who said Nagel had said that was the reason. Next up, the interesting story of Richard Margison. Date of birth 1927, June 16th, in Rochester, New York. Margison, while living in Los Angeles, California in 1962, met one Lawrence Howard, Jr., 6 feet tall, 300 pounds, of Mexican descent. Howard was engaged in collecting funds to support anti-Castro forces. Howard went to the Florida Keys in 62 for 6 months for the purpose of training troops to invade Cuba, and thereafter in late 62 returned to LA accompanied by Rudy Hernandez. Mexican in his 20s, 5'2", heavy build, and an unsubbed aka Slim. No other name known. White male, 5'6", also in his 20s. Slim and Rudy resided at Olive Hotel, Olive Street, Los Angeles. Howard's specific address unknown, but lived in East or Northeast LA. All were employed by Jack Casey, not further described, painting and refurbishing the old Union Temple building located behind the LA Greyhound bus station. This building reportedly housed the Marcade printing shop. In the basement which at that time was engaged in printing the original draft of Richard Nixon's book after he lost the presidential election. Through these individuals, Margeson met a man called Tex who arrived from New Orleans in late 62 or early 63. Tex reportedly was a hitman and described as a white male, late 20s, about 5'7", slender build, 135, former military, and a rotten disposition. Margeson said Tex visited his house on Trade Street and furnished his name as Harvey Lee. Tex left Los Angeles, destination unknown, after about 2 weeks. Following the Kennedy assassination and pictures of Lee Harvey Oswald, Margeson realized that Tex and Oswald appeared to be identical individuals. Margeson said Howard was later subpoenaed by District Attorney Jim Garrison in New Orleans. Margeson decided to come forth after viewing a recent TV documentary on the Warren Commission investigations, wherein it was depicted Oswald was in Russia, while in fact Oswald was in California. This caused Margeson to believe that a conspiracy could possibly have existed and that Oswald may not have acted alone. So, yeah. Next, we jump to Gerald Patrick Hemming. He states there were several clusters of people and 2 large, long tables in this room. And at one end of the room, Hemming and Davis were approached by one man. 4 others were within hearing distance. The man made a proposal to Hemming to assassinate JFK. Nelson Bunker Hunt was in the room, but at the other end from the man who made the proposal. Hemming declined, saying, "You shouldn't be talking to me directly about this." Hemming would not identify the man who made the offer. On November the 18th, 1963, Vidal left for Dallas from Miami. He was driven there. He returned by plane on the evening of November 22nd, getting into Miami at nighttime. Hemming told Gayton Fonzie and me at the meeting in Fort Lauderdale that the man who took Vidal to Dallas on November the 18th, 1963, was Vidal's case officer. This implies that Colonel William Bishop might have been Vidal's case officer and the one who drove Vidal to Dallas. Vidal did not have a driver's license, thus explaining why he did not drive. Could drive, however, according to Hemming. This fits in with Escalante's statement that Vidal told the Cubans he was driven by Colonel Bishop from Miami to Dallas in November of 63, where he met with wealthy Texans. All the above items are consistent with the statements of Colonel William Bishop and the documents that Hemming gave to me. Recall that Colonel Bishop spoke of meetings in Dallas with Vidal, General Walker, and others, in which assassination of JFK was discussed. Other meetings included Charles Willoughby, then an employee of H.L. Hunt. It is tied together. Let's see. The importance of this chain of evidence cannot be overemphasized. For the first time, we have direct evidence that strongly tends to implicate the Dallas right wing in the JFK assassination. It also implicates Guy Bannister in New Orleans. It's tied together by independent statements of General Fabian Escalante, Colonel William Bishop, FBI and CIA documents, and the statements of Hemming. Recall once more that Hemming had told Dick Russell in 1992 about Vidal going to Dallas in the week before the assassination and meeting with wealthy Texans. Hemming made his statement before Escalante's Cuban intelligence conference in 1995. And now the moment you've all been waiting for. This long and winding road, which I have paved with bricks of information leading us to this ultimate destination. And trust me, there is a narrative here of interconnected characters. In doing research, sometimes you find funny things along the way. things that make you go, hmm, interesting, interesting. Now, this rifle that we talked about, this Johnson 30-06, sporterized, it was found, had to be found somewhere in or around the schoolbook depository on November 22nd, thusly to be investigated by the FBI on November the 23rd, and suddenly disappeared into thin air after that. Was allegedly, I believe allegedly, I said it was found possibly on the second floor of the schoolbook depository. Possibly. There was also a 30-06 shell found on the roof of the Dallas County Records building some many, many years after the assassination when they were doing some refurbishment on the roof. So it possibly could have been found there. It also could have possibly been found on the roof of the schoolbook depository. And you might say, well, Rob, they didn't find a rifle on the roof of the schoolbook depository, did they? Well, actually, according to Tom Bethel, who was an investigator for Jim Garrison for a time, quote, rifle found on roof of schoolbook depository. See volume 15, page 590, testimony of Thayer Waldo. According to Sprague, a sequence showing this rifle being brought down from the roof of the schoolbook depository is shown in the Dallas Cinema Associates film of the assassination. So there's that. Either way, wherever this rifle was found, I believe it is a highly important piece of information. And now that you see the interconnections between all of these characters and all of these locations, be it from LA to Dallas to New Orleans to Florida, whether it be the CIA, the FBI, the anti-Castro Cubans, the extreme right wing, the mafia, all weaved and tied in together through certain individuals and circumstances. Just to reiterate what I've always said before, whoever was pulling that trigger on November the 22nd, 1963, was motivated by one or two things, or possibly both. Number one is money. You pay somebody enough money, they'll kill whoever you want them to. The second thing is ideology. If somebody feels so strongly about cause or a certain thing, and if they believe that person in their sights poses a direct threat to their deeply held beliefs, they wouldn't hesitate to pull that trigger, and you wouldn't even need to pay them to do it. But sometimes it's a combination of both. It doesn't hurt. Hey, yay, Kennedy, you have no problem pulling that trigger. Well, here's an extra 50 grand for you. That's icing. That's what we call icing on the cake, folks. So again, I led you down this long and winding road, this tangled web of people, places, and events and circumstances to arrive here at this point where on Thursday, November 21st, 1963, The man by the name of Warren Castor carried 2 rifles into the school book depository. Now, Mr. Castor was an employee of the Southwestern Publishing Company and had been since 1952. Not necessarily in this Dallas office, though. There was a period of time before he started with Southwestern Publishing Company that he spent in the U.S. Navy, Naval Intelligence. um, Joseph Ball asked him, "Your office is on which floor?" Castor says, "Second floor." Ball says, "Did you ever bring any guns into the school book depository building?" Castor says, "Yeah, I did." "Whose guns were they?" Castor says, "They were my guns." "What kind of guns were they?" Castor says, "Well, one gun was a Remington single shot 22 rifle, and the other was a 30-06 sporterized Mauser." Do you understand what I'm getting at, folks? What if, and this is a big ass what if, and I know that, what if this rifle was actually a Johnson 30-06 sporterized? I'm not sure how well Castor knew rifles and weapons. So where did he get these guns from? Well, I'll tell you. He had just bought them at Sanger Harris Sporting Goods Department, allegedly. Yes, I picked up both rifles in cartons, and just like they were, this was during the noon hour, and I entered the Texas School Book Depository building on my way up to the buying office. I stopped by Mr. Truly's office, and while I was there, we examined the 2 rifles that I had purchased. Did you take them out of the cartons? Yes, I did. Who was there besides you and Roy Truly? Well, I'm not really sure who was there. I think you were there, Bill, and Mr. Shelley was there, and Mr. Roy Truly. Now, I don't know who Castor is addressing here when he says, "I think you were there." I'm sure it wasn't Joseph Ball, the man who's questioning him, so there must be somebody else in this room. I don't know who it is. The only people that I know about in any event were workers at the time. I'm not quite sure how many. I couldn't even tell you their names. I don't know the Texas School Book Depository warehouse workers there in the shipping department. Now, when Oswald was arrested and interrogated, he did mention that this guy had brought rifles into the school book depository and were showing them to Mr. Truly. So they go on, banter back and forth. The weird thing is, though, this guy decided not to come to work on November 22nd, 1963. Now, remember, I told you his name is Warren Castor. Okay. Everybody knows the Sylvia Odio story, right? Where we allegedly have, at one point, it was identified that it was Lawrence Howard, and Seymour who went to visit Sylvia Odio and make these wild claims. Later, Howard denied going to Sylvia Odio's, but Lauren Hall admitted to it. And this led to a falling out between them two. But the interesting thing about the Odio incident is we have these names, these anti-Castro mercenaries' names attached with this. Okay. Now I know this man, Warren Castor, is named Warren Castor, obviously. But in the course of my checking things out and in the course of investigating another line, which I'm hoping it's going to be something big and it's going to be out somewhere around the anniversary of the assassination. But in the course of investigating that line of research, I came across something that has to do with Sylvia Odio and uh, another colonel. Now, this colonel's name is Colonel Castor. Now, this information is coming in to the FBI on November the 30th, 1963. A Mrs. C.L. Connell of Lakeshore Drive advised that she has ascertained the identity of an individual previously known to her only as Colonel Castor, to be one Colonel Robert L. Castor of Fieldwood Street, Dallas, Texas. She stated she has also determined the identity of an individual previously referred to her only as Mr. Martin, to be Johnny Martin of Carnegie Drive, Dallas, Texas. It may be noted that Mrs. Connell is a volunteer worker on the Catholic Cuban Relief Committee at Dallas, Texas, and has furnished limited information on the above individuals. Now you might think, okay, well, what does that mean? Well, this report is so brief that it requires some suspicion. It's deceptive and makes one wonder about later FBI and Secret Service reports. According to this author, she knew Mrs. Castor well and Colonel Bob slightly. They suspect her. Bob thinks she may be CIA. She appears to have remarried and not now to be living in Dallas. She could not possibly. Now they're talking about Mrs. O'Connell, the woman who did this report to the FBI. She could not possibly have failed to tell the FBI of the Castor connection with the Cuban Catholic Relief and Father McCann. And if she failed to mention Odio, that is simply fantastic and requires additional suspicion of her. There is ever so much she could have reported and assuredly should have, of which I know. The other reporting of this pair of agents, as I recall, seems to leave much to be desired. Johnny Martin is an unusually common name in this story. This one was a gun merchant who owned a gun store, who also owned a laundromat. He also knew Sylvia Odio. He also dated her sister. Have you any idea where the limited information she had earlier furnished might be? Earlier than 11:30 means the FBI had to have known of Sylvia and her story earlier than the first report on it. I have, and would seem to indicate they were reluctant to see her and get the story from her. Mrs. Connell is not Catholic. She had a rather close relationship with Odio, if you know what I'm saying. Wink, wink. Johnny Martin, whose real name is Juan Martin of Dallas, Texas, advised he is acquainted with Sylvia Odio, who approached him to help her with the organization known as Junta Revolucionaria, otherwise known as Jure, Jure. However, he did not help her, and he had never heard of Lee Harvey Oswald prior to November 22nd, 1963, and I never met a Lee Harvey Oswald either. This report was taken on December 19th, 1963 by James Hosty. Yeah, that guy. So the FBI connects this with the Odio story in every way, but fails to have even a glimmer of the readily available facts, including it could never have overlooked. This guy was a gun merchant, as they must have known. There are other John Martins who had to be of interest, and they do not even mention them to say this is not one. Example, Marina's shepherd, Ruby's lawyer, Castro's prisoner, writer and Dallas speaker. Incidentally, he was at this time in Dallas, having spoken there October 1st. His origin is not indicated. His business, his phone, the kind of help Sylvia sought, guns, whether she had ever sent him customers, people looking for him, etc. That is not even a barely adequate cover report. It is like these in New Orleans by Wall, woefully inadequate for even the pretense of the investigation. It indicates to me by this time the FBI was consciously covering in this story, which may explain the delay in Odio. However, with the report of the day before of the Odio interview not mentioning Martin, these seem to have been no reason. There seemed to be no reason for knowing about Martin or asking him what is hidden from the Odio report. Hosty, the lone agent on this one, had no interest in dates, yet the indefiniteness of the Odio story required interest in dates. We do not know whether there is earlier dates on Martin, and on a gun merchant, are we to presume there wasn't? How Hosty spoke to him, whether he had known him earlier, or whether anyone in the FBI did, which is more than likely. In short, this too demands further interest in both the content of the story and the FBI's handling of it. So, interesting. Now, one can make a bunch of suppositions of things. What if? Let's play the what if game, folks. I love to play that game. What if this 30-06 sporterized rifle that this Castor fellow brought into the school book depository, what if he never took it home? What if it wasn't a Mauser? What if it was a Johnson? What if it was the Johnson that was pawned by Hemming and Hall in Los Angeles to the Halfcock Detective Agency? What if this Colonel Castor fellow, who's mentioned by FBI reports and associated with the Odios and Johnny Martin or Juan Martin, again, these names keep popping up. Jack Martin, John Martin, Johnny Martin, John Herbert Martin, Jim Martin, James Herbert Martin, James Martin Thorne, Joan Martin, Martin, John Martin Jr., John T. Martin. And I could go on and on and on, and I will. at a later date. But, you know, what if, okay, what if we know Hall picked this rifle up out of Hawk from the Hathcock Detective Agency, and we know he came back through Dallas. Now, what if this rifle was meant or put there to set Hall up? Or what if it was used in the assassination? Either way, you got a pretty badass sniper rifle with an anti-Castro mercenary's fingerprints all over it. Not to mention a detective in Los Angeles, probably right wing as well. But this rifle had to be found somewhere in or around that building. And it's pretty funny that another 30-06 motorized rifle was taken into it a couple days prior to the assassination. Pretty interesting that this rifle was allegedly found on the second floor. And pretty interesting that this Warren Castor fellow's office was also on the second floor. And he admitted to taking the rifle up to his office after showing it to his coworkers that day. The question is, he says in his Warren Commission testimony that he took it home and that the rifles were in his house on November the 22nd. But I can find no police report, no FBI investigative report that actually checked up on this or did any kind of investigation into Castor. Now it's interesting. This guy's name's Castor. Any relation to this other Castor fellow who was visiting Odio and this Johnny Martin, this other gun dealer? Anything going on with this Colonel Castor to Colonel Bishop and Colonel Willoughby being tied into all these extreme right wingers like Hunt and all these generals and colonels and these anti-Castro communists? Interesting to think of, folks. I'm not saying it's the rifle. I'm just saying we have to somehow count for this rifle. And if things went down and this kind of a thing, it's pretty crazy. But anyway, that's it for me. That's it for this show. I hope you enjoyed the long and winding road. I hope the payoff was worth it. Thank you for listening. Thanks for staying with me. This has been episode number 227 of the Lone Gunman Podcast, and this has been your boy, Big Bad Bob, with you for the show. That's right. Follow along on TikTok, motherfuckers, at the Lone Gunman 7, on Twitter at the Lone Gunman 7, on YouTube, the Lone Gunman Podcast channel. Make sure you're liking and subscribing and sharing all this shit. I love you. Happy Easter. God bless. Peace out. Until next time.